Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We're delighted to have you here for this conversation over the next few minutes with our esteemed guest, Dr. Wallace J. Nichols. So today we are going to be talking about catalyzing a blue mind for ocean health and personal health in America's National Marine Sanctuaries. It's going to be a virtual discussion, obviously, but there'll be so many ways that you can connect with our National Marine Sanctuaries and with the work that Dr. Nichols is doing, and we'll talk about that today. Of course, Dr. Nichols is famous for his acclaimed book, Blue Mind, The Surprising Science That Shows How Being Near, In, On, or Underwater can make you happier, healthier, and more connected and better at what you do. My name is Joel Johnson. I am the president and CEO of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. Our National Marine Sanctuaries are partnerships of people. They are sources of solutions to some of the greatest challenges facing America today, and frankly, the world. Those challenges are big existential threats, from climate change to biodiversity loss, and frankly, even systemic inequities. Now, the National Marine Sanctuaries play a vital role in ensuring ocean and Great Lakes health, and we're going to talk about how that can matter to you as you think about your own well-being. So that brings us to our conversation today. Dr. Nichols is going to share his groundbreaking insights and personal experiences today on how water can enhance our own happiness, creativity, and overall health. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Wallace J. Nichols.
Hey there, Joel. How are you doing?
Lovely. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Jay, before we get into some of the conversation that we have going today, I think it would be good for us to set up for all of our attendees on today's discussion precisely what is Blue Mind and some of your work.
Yeah, I'll just define Blue Mind as we dive in here. Blue Mind is just a phrase that explains or gives a name to a feeling that I think we all are quite familiar with, and that's how the water shifts us into this calmer, more connected, even more creative place. And I was curious about the science behind that, and that's what led to writing this book about Blue Mind.
You live in Northern California, Jay, near the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which was designated, I believe, in 1992. And of course, you're a marine biologist, you're an author, you've spent a lot of time there, you're an avid diver. And folks in California will perhaps know you also as an ambassador for the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. So let's start with that. Your sense of place, the Monterey Bay area, how you became an ambassador. Maybe share with us why.
Yeah, you're right. I feel very fortunate to live next to the Monterey National Marine Sanctuary, and as a marine biologist, I maybe have an extra level of appreciation for how incredible that is, and the privilege that it is to go for a walk and see whales, literally, or otters, and be able to go down to the dock and buy a fish from the person who caught it that day. And when I'm having a rough time, which I have, as we all have, I can go down to the sanctuary and it helps me heal. So why am I an ambassador? Well, that's pretty, what else would I be an ambassador for in the world if not that sanctuary and the idea of the sanctuary system? I honestly can't think of anything I would put my mind and my life behind that could be greater than that. So it's an honor to be one of the many ambassadors for this idea, but also for these places that are, as you said in your introduction, just so special and unique in the world. So yeah, that's why I can't imagine not stepping up as an ambassador. And if you hadn't asked me to be an ambassador, I'd still be an ambassador with a lowercase a.
Mm-hmm. Well, we certainly appreciate it, and frankly, all of those folks who join us today, I think all of our attendees in this discussion are, in their own way, have the opportunity to play that ambassador role as well. And of course, Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, as you shared, is one of 15 National Marine Sanctuaries and 2 National Marine Monuments that make up this large system of marine protected areas that stretch from the coast to coast and also into the Pacific. California is kind of unique and special. There are several sanctuaries along the California coast, starting with the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary all the way up to the Greater Farallones and Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuaries. And soon, potentially, a newly proposed sanctuary, Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, might be designated. So it's an exciting time for the sanctuary system. Myself, I've been able to connect to the sanctuaries through my passionate pursuit of fishing. That's how I connect to water. And I know many of the folks who will be joining us today and also who really care about our sanctuaries find a wide variety of ways to connect. I can think of fishing, of course, being one, kayaking and boating. And of course, these sanctuaries support commercial fisheries as well. Diving, naturally, we've got to talk about diving. Diving is a way in which many people discover their sanctuaries. And divers, scuba divers in particular, they sometimes have these lists of places they've got to see. And of course, National Marine Sanctuaries have made it on that list. Jay, you're an avid scuba diver. You've traveled the world. Even as we were setting up this call, I think this conversation, we were on calls and you were all over the place, diving and exploring. And you've traveled the world to share that Blue Mind message. So what makes diving, particularly in a National Marine Sanctuary, special to you?
There's this notion with the ocean that, if you look out on it, it's beautiful, but you really can see very little of what's going on in a sanctuary, for example. You might see a fish jump or a bird dive or, a dorsal fin of a marine mammal if you're lucky. But once you stick your head under the water, it really is just this whole new world. And you get to really witness what life on Earth is all about. Just the vast majority of life is aquatic. It's the source of all life, but it's also home to the majority of life on Earth. Nothing against the land. I love the land. It supports us all quite well. And I like the air as well, need it to breathe. But you get out on the ocean and stick your head underwater, and it just, as Jacques Cousteau, it pulls you into its net of wonder forever once you get hooked. So diving, whether it's scuba diving or free diving or snorkeling, affords that opportunity to just stick your head under the surface. And, it's true for these, beautiful tropical places. It's also true for the colder, more kelp or dominated places. And it's also true for our lakes and even the rivers. So I encourage people to explore their water wherever they are. And, for me as a biologist, that's all over the place. I go a lot of great places because it's my job. But wherever you are, I'd say, have you jumped in the water lately? Have you stuck your head underwater? Have you been diving down to see what the bottom is like? And you may say, well, yuck, I don't like the farm pond dive very much, but give it a shot. You might be surprised how cool your lake, river, ocean, patch of ocean, wetland, pond actually is. And so that's part of my mission, is to reconnect people with their water wherever they are, not just the dream dive locations that we see photos of on social media or films about. And so, whether the water's cold or warm or a little low visibility or perfect visibility, whether it's full of humpback whales and sea turtles or maybe catfish, that you got all those options to explore. Yeah, so that's why I love diving. It just makes the world 3/4 bigger all of a sudden once you get in the water.
That's right. It definitely expands your mind. I grew up on the shores of Lake Erie in Cleveland, Ohio, and Cleveland, Ohio, classic Rust Belt city, has a lot to offer. But when you look out on Lake Erie and you realize that this vast, incredible inland sea has its own special place. And for us, growing up, we fished it and we were able to take sustenance, directly from the lake, which fed my family. And of course, also get a break from some of those urban pressures that dominate that kind of city life. And of course, I can think of numerous special moments for me in sanctuaries or on the Great Lakes or in the oceans that have meant something really personal to me. But I'd love to ask you if you could share a moment in your own experience in the sanctuary, any sanctuary, where you learned or experienced something personal for yourself.
Yeah, I do want to point out, you mentioned Lake Erie, the Potomac River, the Anacostia River. Those are all three examples of places that people are working hard to fix what's broken, to clean them up, to improve the water quality, to increase the biodiversity, and increase the access among those who live near them. And you think about that and the transformation that happens to the communities when they either lose that access or gain that access. And in one direction, it's a tragic loss. In the other direction, it's a spectacular opening up of all of the blue mine benefits, along with the economic and ecological benefits. And my, near and dear to my heart is obviously the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And our family went through mid-pandemic a personal crisis in that we lost our home and all of our things in a catastrophic wildfire. And I don't know, things would have gone quite differently if I didn't have my water connection to lean on. And going to the beach, even going to Mill Creek that leads, a few clicks downstream, it goes into the sanctuary. Getting in the water, going to the beach, getting in the waves, putting my head beneath the surface, and disconnecting from my red mind, which is sort of the anxious state that we spend most of our time in these days, and trying to avoid gray mind, burnout, required that for me. And thankfully, I had the sanctuary as medicine through not just the pandemic, but through this challenging period of loss and grief and confusion. And everybody had some version of that. Now, we're not unique. Everybody has experienced some major stressor in addition to the ones we all have experienced. And people who have had water to lean on in whatever form have fared better. And that's a message that I want everybody to hear and understand and practice, actually. So I've had the good fortune to travel around and visit quite a few of the sanctuaries, and reviewed the map, and I was trying to surprise myself that I've touched quite a few of them through the years. And hopefully we'll get to the remaining handful of them eventually. But that, the Monterey Bay being in our backyard has served, in so many ways, professionally and personally. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I can think about, I'm sure we all probably have experiences too, where we have experienced some pretty big stressors and losses and found some comfort and healing in nature. But I think when we talk about the ocean maybe is a bit more special. And I think there's maybe some science behind that folks can learn about through reading Blue Mind. Perhaps you can share just a couple of those very specific connections about our own biology that make that connection very special.
Yeah, I try to be as ecumenical about water as possible. So I love the ocean. I'm a marine biologist, but I have had amazing experiences in lakes and rivers and even pools and in urban waterfronts. So when we talk about Blue Mind, there's a big ocean piece to this, but really it's an invitation to everyone and all of the water that you love to think about it through this lens. And the biology is pretty interesting. It's not really a surprise that the sight and sound of water would put us at ease, because our ancestors didn't have plumbing. We didn't have bottled water. We didn't have a tap, within a few feet away from almost wherever you are. So being by the water was just a matter of security, survival, and the signal of the water, of course, from the evolutionary perspective, would be a signal of wellness. Uh, so there's that piece of it. What adds to that is when you step up to the water visually, your world is simplified. Auditorily, your world is simplified. When you float in the water, somatically, you get that bandwidth back. And in our built environment that's so full of screens and stimulation and distraction and technology addiction and to-do lists and I won't even go into it all. That is such a needed break and has some incredible value to it because it calms us down, connects us to ourselves, connects us to each other. The quality of conversations increases, but it also boosts our creativity. It increases our compassion through the sense of awe that we feel when we're at that big water. And that all translates into our lives on land. We're more productive, we're healthier, we get along better, and we write more clear, concise emails to each other. And in this world of sort of lots of reasons to be in conflict, that's quite welcome. So from the emotional wellness perspective, but also the cognitive wellness perspective, we become better people, better at what we do, better to each other. And this is the big play for me. When we connect those dots, there's this regenerative feedback loop that can occur. So if you say that river keeps me happy and healthy and connected, makes me a better person, what can I give back to that river to keep it that way? Mm-hmm. And that is a powerful feedback loop that we see it in action when it occurs. If going to the water is helping our first responders and our veterans heal themselves, and they serve us, that is a big deal. If it's helping our nurses and doctors and teachers go to work every day and then just, deal with whatever they have to deal with at work, but then they can soothe their soul by going to a sanctuary or going to their lake or their river, that benefits all of us in society. So that's kind of the story we're telling. It's sort of taking our former water story that we all learned in school and bringing it up to the 2020s standpoint as far as the research. What is healthy water really worth? And it's worth quite a bit more than what we've been saying. So let's update our talking points is kind of the goal here.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And I think we can all relate to the idea of that feedback loop and what it gives us in that connection, and perhaps whether it's unconsciously or consciously, what we then give back either to our family, our friends, our community, our workplace, and then, as you put it, back into the resource. You can't help but make that connection. As an angler, one of the things that we often talk about is a honey hole, and that's where you have a special place that you like to fish, that you just know every time you go, you're going to have that connection with the water and the species there. And oftentimes you'll hear the story of don't give it up, right? Don't share it. It's a secret, right? Because you don't want anybody else in that space. And I often say, if it's a honey hole, you should share it loud and proud, right? Because the last thing you'd want to do is come back to that place and then see it degraded, plastic pollution, trash, or some other threat happen in that incredible site. And of course, the power of National Marine Sanctuaries is that they permanently protect from, in some cases, the seafloor all the way through to the surface of many of these spectacular places in our oceans and Great Lakes. And interestingly enough, those protections have come into place because a group of people, identified it and brought it to the community's attention and really elevated and raised it up. They took their honey hole, if you will, and said, this is part of my feedback loop. This is who I am. This water connects with me and I identify with it. And therefore it's very special. And of course, there are really unique parts to the ecosystems of our national marine sanctuaries, from kelp forests to special populations like sea turtles and endangered southern sea otters and other types of incredible species of fish and mammals that can make that connection as well. The thing that feels like it can disrupt that feedback loop and kind of probably pull you quickly from Blue Mind is the threats to the oceans and the Great Lakes in the United States. These big looming large threats that can cause climate anxiety. There's a word for you, that we've seen pop up in the last few years. The sense of overwhelming dread or doom that the world is changing and I don't have control over it. I don't know how to respond. It just creates that sense of anxiety. And thinking about those threats, and maybe this is something you've seen locally for you, what would be the number one concern or maybe the top concerns you have about the health and habitat of our sanctuaries? And, we can keep it local and talk about Monterey Bay.
Yeah, I think you're right in pointing out the long and growing list of threats to the health of our aquatic ecosystems, our lakes and our rivers and our oceans, and whether it's plastic pollution or oil spills, climate change, warming of the oceans, creating all kinds of issues, overfishing, et cetera. It's a long list. I think I'm going to go kind of to answer your question, like a little higher level. I think the main threat, and we're seeing it being addressed actively, daily, in real time right now, is an outdated lack of creativity in our leadership. And I want to pat you on the back too many times there, but you're an example of new leadership and new ideas and creativity and a kind of a fearlessness that I really admire. And we're seeing big ideas and some creative, bold, youth-led leadership, indigenous-led leadership. You mentioned the Chumash Sanctuary. That's exciting. And so I would say that the lack of participation, the lack of diversity, the lack of creativity has held us back in the environmental movement in many ways. There are books about this. This is not a new idea. But in the past couple of years, I've seen the conversation explode. And then not just the conversation, but the follow-up, which is the important piece of it, the action, and a more inclusive, a more inviting, more creative problem solvers. And so that bodes well. That gives me optimism that I didn't have from that shift. So that's exciting. That's kind of a higher level threat, right? The lack of creativity is certainly a threat, no matter what realm you're discussing. The lack of inclusion. We need a bigger, stronger, more diverse, more creative blue movement, and we're getting it. We are getting it. It's coming. It's happening. And so that's pretty exciting. So it's, there's some good news embedded in that threat, because it's being actively handled, I think. What do you think? What do you think of that?
I love that. I really appreciate that. I couldn't agree more, about, we need the greatest and boldest, kind of thinking right now, and creativity is absolutely at the heart of that. It helps us to solve problems. It helps us to connect to each other. And it inspires us with new ideas. And, one of the things that I think we can look forward to is one creative idea, which is to create more sanctuaries, create more marine protected areas globally around the world. And there is hope on the horizon, with real movement in both global policy and national policy in support of the expansion. The National Marine Sanctuary System, for example, will also be expanding. And that creates those new opportunities to connect with more people, and to drive more creative action. And in fact, I think, the diversity of thought that you're speaking about, which includes bringing different perspectives, whether it's traditional ecological knowledge and wisdom from indigenous peoples or tribal nations, or even just local communities who've had historic relationships, whether they're commercial fishermen or other types of stewards of those waters. Bringing them to the table can allow us to find more solutions. So I just want to pause for a second and also bring the community who is joining us on this webinar today into the conversation. Please, if you have any questions or thoughts for Jay or myself, go ahead and put those in the chat. Feel free to jump in with your creative ideas about how we can protect our oceans and Great Lakes, or even just responses to what we've shared already. We would appreciate it. So turning back a little bit now, Jay, to and I want to move past the idea of calling it a concept of blue mind, but let's just call it the principle, because I certainly feel like I have participated in it and been part of that mind state. So thinking about blue mind and our protected waters, what are the advantages here for these communities now, these stewards who are out there, working hard day in and day out to protect these treasured waters? How can Blue Mind help? What can it do?
Well, the benefits are personal, and they're also professional, and they're public benefits. Mm-hmm. The sanctuaries being one example of marine protected area network, but there are all kinds of marine protected areas popping up around the world. And what we see is, people who live near a marine protected area or live near a park that's protecting the water, the blue space and the green space, fare better. Their wellness indices go up. Their levels of contentment, satisfaction with life. They have this resource, this kind of medicine available to them in their backyard or down the street or a short trip away. And so what we see is, when we start discussing, let's just stick to the sanctuaries here, as sources of ecological riches, if you will, and as the economic driver of the blue economy, but also vast emotional wellness benefits. We start telling that story, it invites a whole new category of people to join in. I mentioned first responders and teachers and nurses and doctors and veterans. They can resonate with that aspect. And public health funding, when we connect the dots, we can attract a different source of funding to protect the waters that are in fact medicine for all of us. And so that's interesting. If it helps us build a bigger, more diverse movement of people supporting this idea of marine protected areas and sanctuaries, and brings in more philanthropy, well, that's good. And if we start telling this story, and kids at all ages learn in school, not just about the water cycle and not just about the ecological benefits of healthy water, but the emotional wellness benefits that extend throughout their lives from birth to death, that will create healthier communities. People will maybe rely on, surfing as therapy rather than some substance that makes life worse as their therapy. So those are all the benefits, and it's that regenerative feedback loop that occurs when we get the value equation right. We've seen what happens when we get the value equation wrong. When we undervalue each other, when we undervalue nature, history has shown very clearly bad things happen. Just turn on the news. You can see the bad things happening. But when we get the value equation right, when we value each other properly and fully, and when we value nature properly and fully, not overvalue, but properly and fully, it's incredible what happens. It's transformative. And so we get the story right about our sanctuaries, when we share that story in compelling ways, we back it up with awesome science, which there is, by the way. If you go into Google Scholar and look up blue mind, blue space, blue health, any of those terms, You'll lose the next week of your life reading all of it. It's amazing. And
Yeah.
so, that's our mission, that's our goal. And I think the sanctuaries are taking the lead. I would love to know how many people are benefiting cognitively, emotionally, psychologically, socially, and spiritually from the sanctuary system. I'd like to know that number. I'd like to know how many organizations are using the sanctuaries in that way, to add to the story about the ecological and economic benefits. And then I want to run that data up the flagpole to attract more support for your good work. I think that's real. I think it's about to happen. And your interest and passion for it is, again, another source of optimism. So that's where Blue Mind and sanctuaries and the concept of marine protected areas or blue parks or protected areas in general, that's kind of where it intersects. And it's not fuzzy thinking. It's not hippy dippy California stuff, although I've spent a lot of time in California. It is neurochemistry and neuropsychology. And it's the hardest science in the room, unless we were attending an astrophysics conference. And then it would be the second hardest science in the room. But, don't be fooled that this blue mind idea is somehow too touchy-feely or something. It's just crack open a neuroscience journal and get back to me if you think it's somehow soft. But it heals, and I was just thinking about this idea of sanctuary. When you go to your sanctuary on land, maybe you take off your shoes. Maybe you dress appropriately. Maybe you hush your voice and you enter with reverence because it's a place of healing and connecting. And that's what our sanctuaries are. You don't come in and wreck the place. You put your mind in a humbled place. Maybe you bow your head. Maybe you bring your surfboard and you leave your shoes on the beach. But we approach the sanctuaries in the water as we approach them on land, with reverence, with respect, because they rejuvenate us and then we return the favor. We polish the floors and dust the pews and clean the windows and light the candles. And we do the same thing with our ocean and our lake and our river sanctuaries. We make sure they are clean and healthy and thriving and biodiverse and serve all of the value that is the potential value there. And so I think even the name works really well when we talk about Blue Mind. And it's a place to connect. It's a place, as you mentioned, to grieve. And you brought up climate anxiety. That's real. That's some real stuff right there. There's plastic pollution anxiety and climate anxiety and extinction anxiety and just regular old anxiety. And if you're not healing yourself daily, you'll burn out. And you can't have ocean and lake and river warriors burning out. It's not okay. I felt it. I know you felt it. We have colleagues who have fully burnt out. We're not at our best when we're bordering on burning out. That goes without saying, I think. We're not at our best when we're fearful and angry and anxious in that red mind mode. We need to be creative and connected and compassionate. And so getting in the water as a regular part of your life is one way to do that.
I thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And frankly, honestly, it touched me because you're right. The burnout is real for all of us who are working hard in our both in many ways, professionally and personally, to do this important work. And especially as we think about the impact on, not only our families and our friends and our communities, but future generations. We need tools like Blue Mind to help us sustain us through this process of stewardship. I really appreciated that you offered us a pretty significant challenge, though, in the ways you responded to that question, which is to say, how many people around our national marine sanctuaries and perhaps even more widely marine protected areas globally, because there's so many different types of marine protected areas, are engaged with health and well-being and thinking about uh, that there are obviously probably hundreds of nonprofits and NGOs, health centers and hospitals, and all kinds of organizations in some way part of this blue mine inventory of people who are bringing that feedback, that regenerative feedback loop you talked about, into their lives. And I think it's a worthy challenge of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, and one we're going to look very, very close at. I think you also bring up a really important point to say that this is also about finding other ways to create value and connect people to these important waters. Even in my own journey to understand the impact of the National Marine Sanctuaries, I'm astounded by the diversity of it. If you're a history buff and you really care about maritime heritage and history and get caught up in whether it's a maritime battle and a shipwreck and what that might mean for your local community or some other important historical fact, or whether you are a diver and this is about creating that passport and connecting with the coral reefs and the kelp forests and all those special places, or like myself, just a humble fisherman who wants to ensure that everywhere they go they carry their fishing rod with them. There's so many different ways to connect, and the impacts, those are really significant and frankly can add up. And I think there should be some information, some publicly available information about what those impacts are, and they certainly would help, that kind of data, to create more value for our sanctuaries nationally and beyond. So that's a really powerful challenge. Consider it accepted, Jay. It's one that I look forward to working with you on. And what I'd like to do now with our remaining time, we've got about roughly 10 minutes left, is turn to some of the questions that we have from our participants today. And let me start with this one. This came from an attendee. Have you found, and this is for you, Jay, have you found that aquariums and zoos with their simulated habitats provide the same benefits as a natural body of water in terms of blue mine? And is there anything that zoos and aquariums can do in particular to promote the message of blue mine? I think that's a fabulous question.
Yeah, that's a big giant softball right in the strike zone there. Yes, and so this idea of blue mind is certainly on a continuum. So each of us can imagine our best version of blue mind. And so for you, that may be on at your favorite honey hole or your pristine body of water on a perfect day, fishing with the people you love. That may be your ultimate blue mind. For somebody else, it may be floating on their back in bioluminescent water, warm water at night with the stars overhead and the bioluminescence all around, or a sweet scuba dive or a surf session. But it's a continuum, and that continuum will go all the way to the kitchen sink, where if you just go to the kitchen sink, turn on the water and splash your face, that can be incredibly helpful and useful, or jumping in a pool or taking a mindful shower or a bath. And so on that continuum, you will find all sizes and shapes of water, aquariums, home aquariums, even a goldfish bowl, all the way up to the state-of-the-art best aquariums in the world. And so there's actually been some studies looking at people's response, their self-reported sense of well-being before, during, and after a visit to an aquarium, as well as their physiological responses. So heart rate slows, breathing rate slows, calmness ensues, skin temperature cools, sense of well-being goes up. And interestingly, in aquarium scenarios with higher levels of biodiversity, that is sustained for longer periods of time. So
Mm.
the aquarium studies reflect that our biodiversity is important to this blue mind concept as well. So water is great. Somebody might say, "Oh, I can just paint a wall blue and that's good, and put on some white noise, and I'll get my blue mind on at home." That gets boring really fast. So that's where the movement of the water, the biodiversity, the element of surprise, things happening that have never happened before. That's always a possibility in nature, that you'll witness some interaction or some subtle shift that you've never seen before. Maybe nobody's ever seen before. So that kind of keeps us, it holds us in this place of soft fascination. That's what the psychologists call it. So we're fascinated, but it's not overwhelmingly fascinated. And so there's an opportunity for us to shift into this blue mind state. So yeah, I think it's a great question. I hope that along with the sanctuaries, that the aquariums of the world step up, because they are centers for blue mind already. They already exist. They just need to update their signage and update their talking points and update their training for their volunteers and their guides and docents, and game on. So I'll give a shout out to the South Carolina Aquarium for leading the way. They've started to put blue mind on the floor, as they say, but also in their training for their staff and in their 5-year strategic plan. So hopefully every other aquarium, zoo, nature center, science center in the world will follow their lead and help us reach the 8 billion people that we're trying to reach here.
Oh, that's an impressive, very impressive move, and it's exciting to hear. Thinking, of course, about those sites, zoos and aquariums, and such. Obviously, every day, thousands upon thousands of young people, go through those spaces, and you think about interpretation, and of course, environmental literacy being big objectives naturally for young people. What about a blue mind? What about thinking about their own health and well-being? I bet that's probably not a conversation that happens too often in an aquarium up against that tank, but probably should. In fact, I wonder if you know about or are connected with any other major youth movements. One of the questions we have is, how can we get youth to connect with a blue mind at an earlier age?
I think young people are intuitively keen to talk about this stuff. They have not formed the institutional barriers and professional inertia that some of us have experience with as our careers evolve and our ivory towers or our silos are formed. Young people just get it, and they say, "Of course, blue mind. Of course, it's part of why I'm here." Educating myself or working for this nonprofit or helping to build the movement. They have no hesitation. And so I think I see that over and over. The human element is important. And, on a completely other sort of note there, our young people are not immune from burning out. And the data are shocking and surprising. Our kids are anxious, they're stressed, and they're burning out. That is not okay. We cannot load them up with, "Hey, you're the hope for the planet. It's your responsibility to fix what we've broken." We can't just load them up with that and the scary news about the end of the world without handing them first the tools to manage that, the weight of that. It's not fair to teach 5th graders about climate change and plastic pollution and extinction and not give them the psychological tools to stay standing. And so if you take these themes seriously and really feel them, it is devastating. And we can't devastate our children and expect them to solve the problems. Some people are pretty resilient naturally. or have ways to stay resilient. But these are big ideas. And so I think it's so important for our young people to understand their blue mind, practice it, and have access to it for their entire lives, especially the people who are moving towards service careers, whether that's in, you know, social justice or environmental health, or, you know, these frontline service careers, first responders and teachers and journalists. Um, it's it's tough. It's tough to show up to work and fight every day. And so let's give our young people all of the tools to remain resilient and buoyant and creative. Blue Mind being one of the best I know of. Yeah.
Oh, I thank you for that. And that's a really fantastic place to maybe end today's conversation for now. But I certainly think we need to come back together and talk about those next steps on how Blue Mind can actually move into a true catalyzation and a program within the National Marine Sanctuaries. So what I want to do is, of course, Jay, is thank you profoundly for your inspiration here today in this conversation and for your research and work on Blue Mind. I think the book that you've given us, Blue Mind, The Surprising Science That Shows How Being Near, In, On, or Under the Water Can Make You Happier, Healthier, More Connected, and at better at what you do, should be in everyone's bookcase and library. Please sign up at our newsletter at www.marinesanctuary.org to stay up to date on all of our events and connect with the community here at the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. Thank you again, Jay. And I'm going to borrow one of your sign-offs and wish everyone water and ask that you all spend some time in water in this upcoming weekend and perhaps over the holidays and find your own Blue Mind. Thank you again for joining us at the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, and we look forward to having you join us in a conversation like this in the future. Take care, and thank you again, Jay.
My pleasure.